Today we're going to pressure can beef stew. Made from all fresh ingredients. You know exactly what's in it. If you have special dietary needs, you can adjust the ingredients to your needs, such as I make mine low sodium so I don't add salt. It's packed in glass jars, so the glass is non-reactive with the contents. And in one afternoon, you can prepare 7 meals that are ready to go instantly whenever you want to eat. So let's get started. Good morning. Today we are going to can beef stew. And I'm going to presume the viewer of this video has a basic knowledge of canning. If not, you can familiarize yourself. There are quite a few YouTube channels that discuss canning, homesteader videos. I suggest anybody new to canning obtain the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. It's got all the guidelines and also the latest Ball Blue Book, Guide to Preserving. This is a meat recipe, and all meat recipes have to be pressure canned. The only kind of recipes that you can can in water bath are things that are acidic or very sweet and pickled things, such as jams, jellies, pickles, dilly beans, that kind of thing. And we are making beef stew. So here are the ingredients. And I want to let you know, this is not a USDA approved recipe. This method is not, has not been officially tested by anybody. There is a recipe in the Ball Blue Book for beef stew, but in that recipe they cook the stew for 5 minutes on the stove before canning it, and they do a hot pack. And I'm going to do a raw pack can. So this is definitely not an approved recipe, but I believe it's very safe. I'm going to pressure can my quarts. I've got 7 quart jars standing by here, and I'm going to pressure can those for 90 minutes. The reason I selected 7 quarts is because I'm using my Presto pressure canner, and it's a stovetop canner, and the maximum capacity of this one is a small unit, and the maximum capacity is 7 quarts. So I planned ahead. I know for my personal preference, we like a very meaty stew. So in my quart jar, I'm going to be filling these about halfway with meat. So here I have almost 4 pounds of beef stew meat. We've got potatoes that I've diced. You can use any kind of potatoes. I think Yukon Gold is recommended generally when canning. They seem to come out better, but I'm using russets, and I've used those before and they came out just fine. We have celery. I'm going to put corn. This is fresh corn, and in between the potatoes and the corn, they've got a little natural starch in them, and that'll help to thicken up your stew. I've also got some chopped carrots. Let's see, we've got the garlic, onions, and I got a little bit of shallots for my stew, and some thyme, fresh thyme, and fresh parsley. I also put a little Worcestershire sauce. And I use Kirkland organic no salt seasoning because it just adds a really great flavor to everything. And before we get to filling the jars, I wanted to just explain to you one of the rules of canning that I live by. For your potatoes, you should always peel them. They're a root vegetable. And the same goes for carrots. They should always be peeled before you slice them. The reason being, that's the whole reason that we pressure can, is because you need to have the high temperature up to 240 degrees inside your cans to kill the Clostridium bacteria, which can cause botulism. And this bacteria is very prevalent in the soil. So it stands to reason if you have a root vegetable that grows in the soil, like carrots, potatoes, anything like that, you want to remove the portion that's been in contact with the soil or the dirt. And that just adds an extra level of protection against the growth of Clostridium bacteria and toxins in your food. So I feel pretty comfortable because I'm going to be pressure canning this for 90 minutes, plus I have peeled my root vegetables. So we are ready to get started here. So the reason I do mine this way and I don't cook it on the stove for 5 minutes and then fill the jars is because I want kind of an equalization of the ingredients of each jar, if that makes sense. So when you fill them this way, you can make sure that you have an equal amount of meat and the different veggies in each jar. Let's see. So we're going to fill each jar approximately loosely packed, approximately halfway with this beef, and I'm going to have about a half a pound per jar. I bought 3 pounds of beef, and you can use chuck or you can use round. I've made chuck before and it comes out very nicely, but this is beef round steak, and I cut it in about inch cubes. So you go and you fill each jar with about a half a pound of the meat, or more if you like more, you know, less if you want more vegetables in your stew. You can put a little more vegetables and less meat, however you want to do it. Doesn't matter the combination, because you're going to be pressure canning it for 90 minutes for quarts regardless. And if you do this in pint jars, you can pressure can for 75 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes, as opposed to an hour and a half for the quart jars. Okay, so we've evenly distributed the meat as much as possible in between these 7 jars, and I just sort of eyeballed it. I don't want to cram pack this meat in there or anything really, because I'm canning and I want the juice that I'm going to have in the jars be able to circulate to make sure that all portions of the jar get nicely processed the same amount of time. I've seen videos where people just cram the meat in and pack it in there real tightly, and I don't think that's a good idea. I pack mine a little bit loosely. All right, so let's go ahead. Now that we have the meat evenly distributed, we're going to put some other ingredients in. And let's see, what shall we put next? The order that you put these in, it really doesn't matter. So let us put, for aesthetic's sake, we've got a red meat in there. Let's put something white. Let's put the onions next. So kind of grab a measuring container and kind of plop the same amount of onion. Well, that's not very much in that one. Let's give it a little bit more. Let's see. I'm just going to put onion in each jar until it's more or less equally distributed amongst all my jars. Okay, so there is the jars with the beef and the onion. Let's make our next layer. How about some celery? Grab some in our little measuring cup. And I'm using a 1/4 cup measuring thing. I am ending up putting about 3/4 of a cup. This is about 3 stalks of celery total here. And I used 1 large onion to distribute amongst all these 7 jars. Next, we're going to add carrots, about a 1/4 cup to each jar. This is about 3 carrots chopped up here. And like I said, you can always put more if you like more, less if you don't care for carrots so much. Okay, so I went back and peeled a couple more carrots. I was not happy with the amount of carrots I had. I wanted to have a little bit more carrot in there, so I chopped up a couple more carrots and another celery stalk and added a little more veggies in there, so that's going to make it really tasty. Okay, next we're going to add, probably our shallots. Let's go with the shallots next. Just put a couple in each jar and just go around until they're fairly evenly distributed. I don't even need the funnel to handle these, I don't believe. Let's see. Put another shallot in each jar. This adds a little bit because I don't have too much onion in there, so I think the shallot is going to help add a little extra good flavor. Then I'm going to add a little garlic, maybe a teaspoon of garlic to each jar. So we've got that one. This is a tablespoon measure, so I'm just filling it about 1/3 of the way to give a teaspoon. Okay, garlic. More or less have to taste as you like your food. If you don't have fresh spices, you can always use dried. You can use dried onion, dried garlic, dried parsley. Okay. Next I'm going to add the potatoes, and I just have these in water to prevent them from browning before I get them in the jars. So I'm thinking probably about a half a cup per jar on the potatoes. We'll come back when those are all finished. Our jars are looking pretty nice. The only vegetable we have to add now is the corn. And the corn is totally optional. If you don't like corn or don't want to add it, you don't have to. But I think it adds a little extra level of flavor, and it's great. So let's throw a little bit of corn in each jar. Maybe 2 tablespoons or so. This is 1 ear of corn that I removed the corn from. And I could have probably used 2 ears of corn. Would have been even better. And we'll be back when those are all loaded into the jars. It looks like my jars are nearly where they need to be. You need to leave 1-inch headspace, which is approximately here. But I have a few jars that are a little bit shy of that measure, and I'm going to add more potato because I felt like when I was putting potato in, I didn't have quite enough. So I'm going to peel and chop another potato and throw more potato in there. My previous canning of beef stew has all been done in pints, so I think I underestimated. Of course, a quart is twice as much as a pint, and I didn't really quite have enough vegetables. And I could have probably used a little more meat as well. So next time I'll know. But anyway, this is good for this time. So let's go ahead and add our thyme and our parsley. A little bit to each jar. I have fresh thyme that I rinsed and chopped. Of course, dried thyme is perfectly good too. Thyme gives the beef stew a really nice flavor. Okay, so every jar has about a tablespoon of thyme in it. Next we'll add our parsley. Of course, fresh parsley or dried parsley, whatever you've got on hand. This is kind of an optional ingredient, but I always love to add a bay leaf into each jar. It gives it a real nice flavor. Oh, they smell so delicious. So delicious. So here is a nice bay leaf. I'm going to just tuck it down the side of the jar here. Okay, we are going to tuck a bay leaf into each jar. I've put one here, here, one here. It really gives it a little additional flavor. Okay, I'm going to also add about a teaspoon of no salt seasoning, maybe a teaspoon and a half, and about a teaspoon of Worcestershire. Now I'm making this low salt because we don't want the additional salt, and I'm also giving some to my ex-husband who has congestive heart failure and is on a low salt diet. So we're not adding salt. We're using unsalted beef stock. The only salt that's going to go into this is the little bit that's in the Worcestershire sauce. And this adds such a good flavor. I think the little bit of salt that it's going to add will be worth it. So we're going to add about a teaspoon and a half of no salt seasoning, about a teaspoon of Worcestershire, and then we'll be back to fill the jars with broth. Alrighty, so we have added our parsley and our thyme, our no salt seasoning, and I ended up putting up about a half a tablespoon of Worcestershire in each jar. And now we will add the beef stock. Alright, so I'm going to add about enough to fill each jar halfway. I don't know if I have enough beef stock. If I need more liquid, I can just add a little water to that. So here we go. It's about halfway. I'm going to fill these the rest of the way to the 1 inch mark, 1 inch headspace mark, with just some tap water. And the beef itself will make a nice broth in here. We didn't have to add beef broth, but I think it adds a little something extra to the flavor. Okay, we're almost there. We filled with liquid to about the 1 inch headspace mark. And now we need to make sure that there are no air pockets in these jars. So you're going to take a knife or a debubbling tool and sort of go down the sides and make sure there are no air pockets in there, which will affect the processing of the food. So I'm going to do that to each and every jar. I have to say I really didn't have much trouble with air pockets in these jars. Everything was sort of uniformly sized, cubed, so there's really no place for the air to get trapped. But you want to make sure that your food does not have air pockets in there, because it won't be properly processed, and you'll run the risk of spoilage afterwards. So now the next step is to take each rim of the jar and clean it off, because you want to have a good seal and you don't want your rings to stick. So you want to not just clean the top edge here, but you also want to clean this area where the rings screw on. So I'm going to do that to each and every jar. Next step is to take your cleaned lid onto the nicely cleaned top of the jar, your nice clean ring, screw it on till it's what they call finger tight, which means just to where it tightens, no further, because you want air to escape from this during processing. This is going to boil, air is going to exit the jar, and then as it cools, a seal will be made. So that's why you don't want the jar too overly full, and you don't want the ring and the lid screwed on too tightly. Just finger tight. So into the canner this will go. I have room in here for all my 7 jars. Now I'm starting with room temperature water. If I was hot packing something, I would start with warm water. But I'm cold packing or raw packing, so we're not going to do that. So I'm going to lid and ring and put all these jars into the canner. So there we have our canner filled with 7 quarts of beef stew. Next thing I'm going to do is put the lid, turn it on to a hot, rather moderately high heat. We're going to bring this to a boil. We'll see steam coming out of here like a locomotive engine for 10 minutes. We got to let the steamer vent for 10 minutes. Then we will put our weight. For my particular elevation, I put a 10-pound weight. And once the weight begins to rock, which takes another 10-15 minutes after you put it on, that's when you start the timing of your 90 minutes for processing. Okay, it's pretty difficult to see. I'm trying to give you as good a picture as possible. But here is the pot after it's been on the stove for about 15 minutes. And the steam is coming out of here pretty much like a locomotive. So we're going to set our timer for 10 minutes. We're going to let that steam escape for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, we will put the weight on. Okay, so our 10 minutes of venting time has concluded. The next step is to put your weight on if you have a weighted canner. And then this back valve will pop up as soon as the pressure builds up inside. We have a safety valve here. If this canner, for some reason, the pressure is not released. You know, before I can, I always check this little hole to make sure I can see through it, and that's to make sure it's not clogged up. But the pressure canners today are built with this extra safety measure of this little pop-out valve. If the pressure gets way too high, that will pop out and release the pressure. So you don't have to worry about anything exploding in your kitchen like our grandmothers used to have to worry about. So now I've put my weight on, and As soon as my weight starts to rock, which takes probably about another 10-15 minutes before the pressure builds up inside the canner, and after the weight starts to rock a little bit, we'll set our timer. Okay, our little pressure valve has popped up, but we are still waiting for the jiggler to start jiggling. It'll do its hula dance. And okay, it's starting to rock. It's been about 20 minutes since I put the weight on there. And now that it's starting to do its hula dance, I have my heat kind of on a medium, and I'm going to turn it down a little bit more because I know mine is about the 4 to 5 to keep this rocking gently like this. So what this means is that the inside pressure has reached over 10 pounds. The excess steam comes out. This is a 10-pound weight. So any pressure above 10 pounds is being released, and that's what causes the little rocking action there of the weight. So I'm going to set my timer now for an hour and 30 minutes. Because once it starts to rock like that is when you start your time. 90 minutes. And when 90 minutes is up, we will come back. Now this has to rock gently like this during the entire 90 minutes. If it doesn't rock, then you have to turn up your heat a little bit and start your timing from 0 again. So you really want to keep an eye on it. You don't want to have to start your timing over. So you want to really make sure that it will continue to rock gently for the whole 90 minutes. And you want to kind of try to keep it gently rocking. If it rocks too much and emits too much steam, then your canner runs the risk of boiling dry, especially for a time period of like 90 minutes. But I have 3.5 quarts inside my pot, and as long as it's gently rocking like this and not releasing too much steam, I don't have to worry about my canner going dry. Okay, my processing time is over. I'm going to turn off my heat. And we're going to let this depressurize at its own rate. It'll probably be about an hour before I see that pin drop, and then at that point I can take the cans out of the canner. So we'll see you back in about an hour. Alrighty, the pin has dropped, indicating that there is no pressure inside. I'm going to carefully remove that. And in a couple minutes, we will open the can. Okay, I've let this cool down for about 20 minutes because the slower you cool it, the less chance of siphoning. So I'm going to open the canner. And let's take a look and see how everything turned out. Well, this smells really delicious. We're going to take these out of the canner and put them on a heat-proof surface. I like to use my cutting board. And you can see it's still piping hot, bubbling inside. They should all be doing that. My water looks fairly clear, so there wasn't a lot of siphoning. Okay. Everything looks good. I like to see that bubbling after even half an hour or so after the canning process is done. And these are all bubbling. So very good. There's a ping. So we are going to let these cool for at least 8 or 12 hours. Then check the seals. Then clean the outside of the jars, remove the rings, and they'll be ready to store. Okay, so the jars are totally cooled. We remove the rings. I've already cleaned these two. Remove the rings, check the seal. If you pull up on it by the seal, it shouldn't break. Then you are going to take your jar and wash it with soap and water real well, because during processing it's normal for a little bit of the contents to siphon out. You can see, especially during pressure canning, and you can see that the level is slightly lower than when I put them in. And the way to mitigate siphoning is to have very gradual temperature changes while you're cooking. Gradually bring it up to temperature, gradually bring it down when you're through cooking, very slowly. Abrupt temperature changes are what make the contents siphon out, or more apt to siphon out. So that's it. We have 7 beautiful jars of beef stew. Now when you go to cook these, you put the liquid into a saucepan and thicken it with a little flour or cornstarch, or you can even use mashed potato flakes. So thicken it a little bit, add the rest of the contents, warm it up, and you've got a great meal. Good for when you don't have a lot of time to cook. You've got something ready to go here, and you know that you've made it. You know exactly what's in there. You know that it's in a nice glass jar. It doesn't have chemicals. Okay, take care. We'll see you next time.